LinkedIn presents.
What matters is your dietary pattern, not any individual food you eat. If your diet is based on healthy foods, it doesn't matter if you have the odd Twinkie or triple cheese pizza. There is a lot of justifiable concern about ultra-processed foods, but they are not poisonous in small doses. Purity in eating is seductive, but it is not necessary.
Happy Friday. I'm your host, Michael Kovnat. This is the Next Big Idea Daily. So what did you have for breakfast this morning? It may seem like an innocent question, but what you eat says a lot about you, and behind every bite is a complex web of economics, ethics, and culture. In a new book called How the World Eats, philosopher Julian Baggini explores the hidden forces that shape our food choices, from the debates over organic versus conventional farming to the global inequalities baked into our supply chains. He argues that our conversations about food are often too polarized and that a better, more sustainable way of eating is within reach. Julian joins us to share some of his big ideas right after this quick break.
Hello, I'm Julian Baggini, a philosopher with a long and deep interest in food and where it comes from. When I started to learn more about the global food system, I realized how incredibly complex it is and how so few of us understand how it all works. And that matters, because food has a huge impact on our health, our economies, our well-being, the planet, non-human life, and even on war and civil strife. I found that it's such a big topic that there are few, if any, who really grasp the whole of it. So I set out, perhaps hubristically, to sketch a picture of how it all fits together by reading the most definitive work and speaking to the leading experts in 17 of its key areas, historical and global. Using my philosophical skill set, I then identified the common principles that characterize food systems that work for us and for the planet. My first insight is that the whole debate about food and farming has become far too polarized. It's not just that this stands in the way of everyone coming together for the common good. It also masks the fact that beneath the dichotomous rhetoric, the world is not nearly as divided as it seems. Take the apparent chasm between organic and non-organic agriculture. In one way, it really is a sharp divide, because you either tick the boxes and get certified organic, or you don't. But in actual practice, the difference between the two camps is very blurry. Some farms are in effect organic, but can't say they are, simply because they don't pay for certification. Nor can we separate them out on the basis of which use fertilizers and pesticides and which don't. Organic farms use both, it's just they can't be synthetic in their definition of the term. That doesn't necessarily mean so-called natural inputs are safer. Copper, for example, is allowed as a fungicide and is used a lot for organic tomato production, but copper is known to be toxic to humans. On the other hand, some non-organic farms use chemical inputs with such care and in such limited amounts that they pose no threat to human health or wildlife. Or take the distinction between farmed and wild catch fish. Which is better? Well, there is no single answer. It all depends. There are some terrible practices on the open seas with huge trawlers scraping the seabed, as good as bulldozing habitats. And there are also awful fish farms polluting surrounding waters and nurturing sick fish. But there is also good practice on both sides. Like most either-or questions about food, farmed or wild is just the wrong question. Simplistic polarized thinking has real consequences. Take the idea that plastic is bad and biodegradable packaging good. By now, you won't be surprised to hear me say it ain't that easy. An extra layer of plastic wrap in the packaging of Danish cold meats increases their shelf life and reduces waste. And for almost all food, the environmental impact of waste is higher than that of the packaging that prevents it. Or take the owner of a veg box delivery scheme who knows that the greenest option is to use reusable and recyclable hard plastic boxes. but has to use cardboard because his customer base is so convinced plastic is always the enemy. When it comes to how we feed ourselves, plurality is key. There is no one right way to farm, to make food, or to eat. It all depends on context, culture, and circumstances. Grazing cattle is sustainable and efficient on the Argentinian pampas, not so easily done at scale on the polders of the Netherlands. The Mediterranean diet may be very healthy, but the Japanese one is at least as good, and it is very different indeed. There is a place for small artisan producers, but the big manufacturers of, say, pasta or noodles do a good job of supplying reliable, tasty, nutritious food at a good price. What works on a wheat farm in one place may not work in another, even in the next valley, let alone in another country. An example which combines my first two insights is a debate over land sharing versus land sparing. Advocates of land sharing argue that farmland has to be made more hospitable to wildlife, so we can share our productive land with nature. Land sparers argue that the best way to protect the environment is to make agriculture as efficient as possible, so it uses less land, leaving other habitats pristine. Well, both are right, and both are wrong. In some places, land sharing works best. In others, land sparing does. The right option in one place can be the wrong one elsewhere. Too often, people advocate for one-size-fits-all solutions. That the world needs to go organic, or that everyone should be using more synthetic inputs. That we should all go vegan. That we should bring down all the big food and agri-businesses. That everything we eat should be prepared from fresh. We, Homo sapiens, have been able to feed ourselves for millennia because we have been resourceful, adapting ourselves to variable and changing conditions. Plurality has been one of our greatest strengths, and we should continue to encourage and celebrate it. When it comes to nutrition, the ground rules are simple, precisely because nutrition is so complicated. It is hubris to think we can micromanage our diets to make significant differences to our health and longevity. The focus should be on the big, obvious elements of a good diet. It is still difficult to beat Michael Pollan's famous 7-word maxim: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. By food, he of course means real whole foods, or those made from them, not highly processed edible food-like substances, to use his memorable phrase. I think most of us know this is true, but we keep getting seduced by hucksters and misguided diet guides who promise us the ultimate health hacks. Right now, the big noise is about the gut microbiome, with many making millions by selling prebiotics and probiotics, gut shots and the like. But the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania have a really healthy gut microbiome, and they don't eat anything like kimchi or kefir, let alone manufactured so-called gut boosters. They only eat what they have gathered that day. Their guts are healthy because they eat a wide range of fibrous plants. The idea that we should focus on the big factors is also a license to relax a little. What matters is your dietary pattern, not any individual food you eat. If your diet is based on healthy foods, it doesn't matter if you have the odd Twinkie or a triple cheese pizza. There is a lot of justifiable concern about ultra-processed foods, but they are not poisonous in small doses. Purity in eating is seductive, but it is not necessary. Of course, many of us have individual needs, which mean we do need more specific dietary advice. We have intolerances, allergies, or health conditions that can be triggered by certain foods. But unless you have a specific medical reason to avoid some foods and have more of others, you should just stop worrying and eat a good variety of proper foods. Around the world, we see huge injustices in the food system. Cocoa farmers who earn less every day than it costs someone to buy just one bar of chocolate made from their beans. Migrant workers exploited as farm labourers, sometimes not even being paid at all. Modern slavery, not just in economically developing nations, under the noses of consumers in industrialised countries too. Livestock kept in atrocious conditions, just so that we can enjoy cheap chicken, burgers and sausages. We all know this, even if we choose to look away. But the shocking insight I had was that these are not bugs in the food system, they are features of it. Our entire supply chain has been designed, or has at least evolved, to make food as cheap for consumers as possible. And we can only do this if humans and animals in the supply chain are exploited. This has to change, but it won't be easy. We have become so dependent on cheap food that when prices rose a few years ago, many found they could not afford to eat, even though by historical standards, households were still spending a lower proportion of their income on food than at almost any other time in history. Some say food cannot become more expensive because the poor can barely afford it now. But the solution to poverty is not to make food so cheap that even the poor can afford it. It is to make sure even the poorest have enough money to feed themselves properly. Nor should it be verboten to consider subsidies for food. After all, many countries, including the USA, already spend billions subsidizing agriculture and other industries. I conclude my book by describing the 7 principles of a humane, sustainable, nutritious food system. If you were to just skip to the end and read these, you might think they sound obvious. I certainly think you'd find them hard to disagree with. But that is what makes them so powerful. Everyone agrees with them, but hardly anyone is acting in accordance with them. And so my insight is this: not only do we almost all agree about what a better food system should look like, we know most of what has to be done to make it a reality. There are numerous levers we could pull. We could have much higher standards of animal welfare. The power of large businesses to shape the food world in their own interests rather than in those of humankind could be curbed. The costs placed on society and future generations of the food system could be properly measured and either paid for or not allowed to occur in the first place. Every country could have a proper land use framework to achieve the right balance between agricultural productivity, conservation, and regeneration. Our diets can shift away from highly processed foods made from commodities towards ones based on whole foods. Farmers and farm labourers could receive a much fairer share of the price paid by consumers. And every citizen has the potential not only to have a voice in how the food world is shaped, but real power to use it. Too many calls for change are utopian, requiring a wholesale shift of values that is not going to happen. Fortunately, we do not need to tear the whole system down and start again. Positive change depends only on people recognizing that the values we already hold are discordant with the food system that we have. But the values and practices can be brought into harmony by a series of adjustments, some radical, but all ad hoc and doable. The will for change and the possibility for change can converge, join forces, and transform how the world eats for the better.
Thank you, Julian. All right, everyone, you can get a copy of How the World Eats wherever you get your books. And if you got something out of today's show, please leave us a rating or review to help others find it. That does it for us this week. These episodes were written by me, Michael Kovnat, and edited by Caleb Bissinger. The Next Big Idea Daily is proud to be part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. We'll see you Monday.